Hello, welcome to my little trip down road testing memory lane Q&A video again for you today. Thanks for all your comments and questions and support over the last few videos. It's very much appreciated. I haven't been on my travels this week for the first time in a long time, which is a blessed relief. But I've been out on my 750. I've got it MOT'd. I've got some new tyres, which is quite interesting. I changed, I used to have Supercoursers on there, Supercourser SP V4s, and ran those all the last year, track days on the road, and they're fantastic. But I mean, it's not often you can say this about new tyres. They were almost too grippy for my bike. I mean, my bike's got 127 bhp, and really they had more grip than my bike had power. So although the bike felt just absolutely solid on the track, I kind of felt I wasn't getting the potential out of the tyres, and it kind of felt like I was riding through treacle a little bit, and the bike didn't have much feel. So I've gone down a notch to Pirelli Diablo Rosso 4 Corsa, which are fast road track day tyres. I've used those quite a lot. They feel like kind of older generation Supercoursers in their grip, but because you can kind of have your cake and eat it with new tyres, they last a lot longer. They're more, they work in a bigger temperature window. They're better in the wet. I've still gone for the 180/60 kind of balloon size rear tyre, just because it's sort of slightly better steering, more side grip, and I like the look of it as well. So I'm looking forward to running those this year. But let's crack into some questions, shall we? So the first one is from Love Cheap Cars 4676, don't we all? I'm wondering if there's something wrong with me. I just cannot gel with modern bikes. I find that on-off fueling from a closed throttle and general lack of connectedness of ride-by-wire bikes really annoys me. And then don't even get me started on quick shifters. I have a 2021 Speed Triple 1200 RS, bought second-hand last year, and have serious buyer's remorse. I just don't like it as much as the older superbikes I have, early 2000s, cable throttles, injection and carbs. Should I stop riding these older bikes for a while and ride the 1200 RS exclusively? I thought that the RS would be so good I'd naturally just leave the older bikes in the past. But riding them back to back just keeps highlighting how artificial and disconnected the RS feels in comparison to the smooth, intuitive feeling I get from the older bikes. Or do I give up on the RS and accept my brain just can't accept the way bikes ride now? Well, that's a really interesting question, and thank you very much. Yeah, I mean, I'd agree that a lot of newer bikes have kind of a synthetic feeling. You know, they've got ride-by-wire, they've got a lot of electronics, and I would agree that is probably the case with the 1200. And yeah, we kind of yearn for those days where we had carburetors and nice smooth fueling, although those early injection bikes were quite snatchy. But what I would say is, I don't think that all modern bikes are born bad. You know, if anyone's seen my 750 video, you'll see that even on a bike of that generation, which was Euro 2 or 3, something like that, even back then, the fueling had to be completely remapped by Suzuki to get it through noise regulations, to get it through emissions regulations. So what you were feeling on the bike wasn't necessarily natural, and that did have a snatchy throttle. And generally now it's been mapped, it's a lot smoother and a lot more natural feeling. So yeah, so I would say that even with the Triumph, there's a really great bike waiting to get out of a really good bike. And you know, I've ridden ride-by-wire bikes that are absolutely superb, and they've kind of got that rich power delivery. They've got a beautiful feel coming off a closed throttle, you know, especially ones that have been mapped, you know, race bikes as well with ride-by-wire. My BMW race bike with a race ECU just feels completely natural. The quick shifters feel beautiful. The rider aids feel really natural. So to sort of sum up, I don't think it's a problem with modern bikes per se. I think it's a problem with the Euro 5, Euro 5 plus, Euro 4, whatever regulations that the new bikes have to meet. And it kind of makes them feel a little bit, yeah, a little bit synthetic, where you want something a little bit more analog feeling. So, you know, rather than get rid of your Triumph, I mean, the Triumph's a great bike, and it's made me think I might have a look through an old MCN at the sort of the birth of these modern generation speed triples, which I would say started 20 years ago with the 1050. I know they went back another 10 years, but the 1050 was really when speed triples started to get really funky. So yeah, I would maybe think about getting it mapped. I don't think you'd really change much with the quick shifter, but the mapping may help with that as well. You know, it's always good to, like I did with MCT, get the suspension looked at, because you know, everything with standard suspension is either built towards regulations or built down to a price and everything in between. So, you know, I reckon you can get your Triumph handling and riding really, really nice. And, you know, at least on par with those older super bikes that you've owned before. So yeah, I'd say keep at it and maybe give it a few little tweaks. But thanks very much for your question. The next one is from UK Surfer 2505. Hey mate, what do you think of the 2004 R6? I really want to get a bike again, but my budget is £3,000 and I love a Yamaha. Hopefully you'll have time to answer. Well, yes. A 2004 R6. Well, I mean, that's quite old now, isn't it? But yeah, you can get them, pick them up quite cheaply. Obviously, with any second-hand bike, you know, getting something in really good condition, something that's been well looked after, something with a good service history, even if it's not a Yamaha service history, is really useful and really needed. You know, when you get the bike, it's good to get it serviced and get the suspension looked at, or get the fueling or whatever looked at. And I think those old R6s, really, super sport bikes of that generation, never really changed that much up until now. I mean, you look at the CBR 600RR of 2003 compared to the one that came out last year in 2024. It's basically the same engine, same chassis. Okay, it's got slightly more modern suspension, it's got rider aids, but it's basically the same bike. And even through the R6's kind of journey from 2004, 2005 it got upside down forks but stayed the same shape, and then 2006 it got ride by wire, much sharper styling, much racier, and really apart from a little change in 2008 it stayed more or less the same for the rest of its life until that was neutered because of Euro regulations, and then finally Yamaha only sell it now as a track only bike. But I think they're really good. You know, thinking back to the group tests of the day, all of those 600s, the ZX6, the CBR 600, the R6, were all really, really close. The lap times split by tenths. The R6 was always the very race focused one. It was always the revvy one, probably one of the most exciting. Yamaha build quality is very good. So, you know, it's just a question, like I say, if you're going to get a bike of that age, just make sure it's been really well looked after. And, you know, even if it's you know, just slightly off what it will still be an amazing bike, which I think you'll really enjoy. And, you know, as a road bike, they're not too uncomfortable. You know, they were back in the days when they had really kind of squishy, soft seats. The riding position wasn't too extreme, although history has shown that 600s didn't sell in the end because they were too extreme. But really, it's not, you know, it's not too hard to live with on the road, and it still makes a great track bike, even by today's standards. So I'd say go for it. Next one is from Jorge Mark 8708. I love the design of the 2012 R1, so sticking with Yamaha super sport bikes. The slightly different front makes all the difference. Love or hate it, no one can't say that it isn't a different bike from the rest. It's a bold and non-conservative design. And of course there's that sound of the crossplane. But is there any difference between the 09 and 12 bikes beyond the front and the traction control? Cheers. Well, yeah, agreed. I think it's a great bike. We did the launch of that bike in Valencia, and the big news at the time was it had traction control. So super bikes of the day, the S1000R came out with traction control in 2010. The ZX10 had it in 2011, and then the R1 followed on in 2012. 6-stage traction control. It wasn't lean sensitive. It also combined anti-wheelie within its traction control. And you know, those were the days where there's a lot of resistance from people about electronics and rider aids, as there is now as well, I suppose. To the point where we got so many kind of comments online and old-fashioned letters coming in saying traction control was a bit of a cop-out for people. People should, you know, learn to ride a bike from an analog point of view. We invited a bunch of readers on a test with us, including a couple of prolific commenters on MCN's website and forums, and we invited them along to ride this bike. We did a series of tests where we managed to kind of hide, I think we put paper bags or whatever over the switchgear and the dash so you couldn't see whether the traction control was on or off. We did a series of tests where people couldn't even tell if the traction was on or off, because you know, these bikes have got so much natural grip. You don't really bump into the traction control on the road unless something happens, you know, slip on some gravel, or if it's wet, or if you're particularly ham-fisted at full lean. You'll never even know electronics are there. So we were kind of saying, well, you know, why wouldn't you have it if the electronics are there? Obviously the argument is the bikes may cost more because they've got electronics. And then we put them on a series. I think we went to Blyton racetrack, and we sent them around on laps with different levels of traction control, just so they could get confident at starting from maximum traction down to no traction. And at the end of the day, we said, we'll just go and spin some laps on the traction control setting that you're comfortable with. And everyone basically put it on maximum, because, you know, behind the bravado of saying that you don't need electronics as a rider, I think most people, me included, like a nice little safety net. Why wouldn't you have, especially on the road? If traction control kind of starts getting in the way of your enjoyment and your performance, then yeah, then it's a problem. But I think to have it there in the background to catch you if anything goes wrong, I think it's a no-brainer. So they're great bikes. You know, that bike was quite controversial. The 09 bike, I rode that at the launch at Eastern Creek in Australia. That won almost everything it entered in the racing world, didn't it? World Superbike, BSB, World Endurance. It won all our group tests. And then the sort of the RSV4 and the S1000RR kind of stole its thunder, especially that it never made massive power, but that wasn't what that bike was good at. It was good at finding grip naturally because of the way the engine worked. It kind of felt like a cross between an electric motor, a V4 and a V-twin and an inline 4. It was a very strange engine, but it managed to create a lot of mechanical grip. So from full lean mid-corner to the corner exit, it could just blast out of corners and make such a jump on the faster bikes that quite often it would lap faster around the track, even though it didn't have the big power. And in answer to your question about what's the differences, I think it's the traction control, like you say. It's the nose. It's got a slotted top yoke like an M1 MotoGP bike, and a longer, softer rear shock to improve the handling. The other kind of significant thing about that bike was that was kind of the generation of Yamahas that also almost sent them over the edge, because the R1 became very, very expensive towards the end of its life. They stopped making that one in 2014. You know, that was knocking on the door of 13, 14 grand back in the day, and people just couldn't afford it. The R1 was £10,000 when it came out in 2009. And then Yamaha decided to produce the MT series of bikes, MT-09, MT-07, which basically saved their bacon. So, you know, the Yamaha R1 probably isn't looked upon too fondly by Yamaha themselves, but it was a great bike. But great question. Thanks very much. Nice to think about that again. This one is from Joshua2326. Uneasy. Just how good would you need to be able to outride the capabilities of a bike? For example, I'm looking at getting into sports bikes from Nakeds. Test rode a 2025 ZX6R, thought it was great, but was wondering why not just get an older 2010 model, for example. Once I put modern tyres on, etc., surely I don't have enough talent to push the older bike past what I can do compared to the 2025 bike. Cheers in advance. Answer to your question is, I don't think any normal rider is good enough to reach the limit of any road bike. There may be some exceptions, but when, you know, we're exposed as testers to, you know, really good riders riding with us at the same time on the same bike, and what they can do with, you know, that machine is just incredible. You know, just thinking back a couple of occasions, we did the 2019 R1 launch at Jerez. Alex Lowe's was riding a standard road bike with the ABS fuse pulled out, admittedly, doing 1:43s around there, which is insane. Alessandro Valia, Ducati's test rider, can hustle those Panigales close to, you know, superbike lap times. He'd easily win a club race on them. So, you know, I don't think any of us are kind of good enough to outride our bikes. So, taking your Condri as an example with the 2025 ZX6R, well, it kind of goes back to what I was saying about the R6. That bike isn't really that different to a 2010 model. Okay, there'll be detail changes here and there and electronics and stuff like that. But fundamentally, it would be very, very similar to ride. You know, just because 600s never really evolved that much because there was no real appetite from the manufacturers to throw loads of research, development and money at them. So, you know, I would say if you fancy it, just get the 2010 model. If you get a good one, put new tyres on it, get the suspension serviced, maybe get it mapped. I think you're going to have a bike which is every inch as good as the new one. You know, the new ones are really short geared, like ridiculously short geared, which might just be the final drive rather than the actual gearbox. I'm sure someone will tell me, and you could make it longer geared again. But yeah, get the 2010 model. You're not going to have ABS necessarily or traction control or anything like that, or a fancy TFT dash, but do you need it? I mean, I don't miss it when I ride my 750 at all, and I'm always on modern bikes. So you know, given that we can't push bikes to the limit anyway, you know, and you maybe want to not go down the route of spending loads of money on a new ZX6R, definitely get the older one. I think you'll be more than happy with it. Thanks very much for your question. Next one from Bradley Alexandra 5821. My question is, which adventure bike impressed you the most? Thanks for your question. What you got in your avatar there? Looks like a Harley and something else. Anyway, which bike, adventure bikes? Well, it's hard not to be impressed by the GS. You know, the R1200 GS, the 1250 GS, I think are absolutely amazing bikes, as is the 1300, but I think it's maybe a little bit too sporty for what it's supposed to be for. Although I understand, and I haven't ridden it, the Adventure 1300 GS is more like a GS, it's more soft and cuddly. So every time I ride a GS, I'm bowled over at how impressive it is in terms of all of its gadgets, how well it handles, how well it stops, how comfortable it is, how sporty it sounds. The performance is incredible. And I guess if I was going to have a bike for absolutely everything, it would definitely be on my short list. But my personal favourite is the long-termer that I had a couple of years ago, the Tiger 1200 GT Explorer. So it had the big tank, It had a 19-inch front wheel rather than a 21-inch front wheel, which I'm not keen on because it's got a narrow knobbly tyres which are noisy and they vibrate more than the 19-inch. But obviously that's what you'd want if you were going to actually go off-road. But the reason I like it so much is just so comfortable. Said it before, said it loads of times. It's one of the most comfortable bikes I've ever ridden. Only spoiled by the screen, unfortunately. The screen is really loud when the wind's in a certain direction. Sometimes it's not too bad, but when it's bad, it's bad. But if I was going to own an adventure bike, it would be just to go touring. It would kind of be, you know, a second bike or whatever, just to tour on. I think that's the one I would go for, because I wouldn't really, although it handles and performs beautifully, that wouldn't be my priority with the bike. I just want it as a big, comfortable, soft, cuddly touring bike. And then I would try and find a way around the screen noise problem with different screens. I mean, generally, lower screens are less buffety than the big, floppy, long ones. But yeah, in terms of the smaller adventure bikes, I think the Transalp is fantastic. Again, that's got a noisy screen, but all adventure bikes have really, compared to sporty bikes. But that Transalp is fantastic. Amazing handling, lovely engine, comfortable, affordable. So yeah, that would be my shortlist. But thanks very much for your question. Next is from Desmi1103. Thank you, Michael, for taking your time. It means a lot to answer a question. I think you answered a question about riding tips. Here's a follow-up question. Would you ever use the front brake during a rear slide or rear brake during a front slide? Or does it only make it worse? Yeah, let me see. So would you use the front brake during the rear? So if you're sliding the rear, it means that you've lost traction on the throttle. So you wouldn't use the front brake to control that, and it would happen so quick you wouldn't probably have the presence of mind to apply it anyway, and it wouldn't help. I guess some really alert racers that knew that slide was coming may damp the slide out a little bit with the rear brake, but I think if a slide happens that quick, you're just a passenger really, and no amount of braking is really going to save you. And then as for a front slide, do you use the rear brake during a front slide? So a front slide will generally happen when you hang on to the brakes too much going into a corner and the front will tuck, or and I've never experienced this myself, but in racing they'll say that a rider will be at full lean in the middle of the corner, and tapping the throttle and taking the weight off the front tyre is enough to make it slide. But again, front end slides happen even faster and more kind of unpredictably than a rear slide. And I don't think pressing the rear brake, you'd even have time to think, and whether it would do anything, I don't know. So yeah, like I've always said before with these, when bikes misbehave, the best way to control them is prevention, rather than cure, because when they do misbehave badly, unless you're racing or absolutely on top of your game, there's very little you can do to stop them. But prevention will save just about any slide or any wobble or anything like that. But great question, thank you very much. Next, from cpinch73. Uneasy, really enjoying your Q&A. Feel like I've learned so much. Thank you. Just over a year ago, I replaced a 2023 Street Triple RS, great bike, with a 2020 Rocket 3R, which I've really enjoyed. But just lately, I feel that itch to go back to the lighter, maybe more fun Street Triple RS, even though it's half the value in bike. Do you think I'm looking at this through rose-tinted glasses, or do I have a valid point maybe? I'd love to see what your views are on this, and maybe some of your viewers. Keep up the great work. Well, I mean, that Street Triple is fantastic. Pound for pound, easily one of the best sports nakeds you can buy. it's probably better than a race rep super sport bike as well, because you can do more with it. But then the Rocket 3R is the complete polar opposite of that bike. It's a lot heavier, it's a lot more cruiser focused, although being a Triumph, they still managed to make it handle really, really well. But I think, you know, the general problem with heavy bikes is that although they cruise well, the ride quality is well, is good, and they perform a lot better than they've got any right to, especially with Triumphs. Heavy bikes kind of take away a little bit of excitement. They're a little bit more tiring to ride, and yeah, they just won't leave you buzzing like a street triple. So yeah, maybe it all depends what you want out of your riding, really. But you know, there is, as you've got two such extremes there may be a middle ground that you might like. You know, the most obvious one is to look at the speed triple 1200 RS. So you've got some of the street triples agility, some of its fun, but you've kind of got a more, you know, heavier, more solid, more kind of grunty, kind of grown-up bike, if you like. So that might be the answer, more of a super naked-y kind of bike. Or the other bike that springs to mind is the Ducati Diavel V4. So it's the same kind of thing as the Rocket, you know, quite a big, heavy cruisery bike, but that really does handle well. That is like riding a super naked. You know, when you get on that Diavel V4, we rode it at its launch in Abu Dhabi. They closed a massive mountain road off for us, and it was a mountain road with 3 massive lanes. It was huge. Had an absolute blast on that bike. It felt more like a street fighter than a cruiser. So maybe you can have your cake and eat it with one of those. They look great, sound great, they finish well, they're well equipped, they hold their value. So yeah, it might be worth having a look at the Diavel. Thanks for your question. Next is from Stanislav Petrov, 8055. Stan, as you say at the end. Hi, Stan. Hi, Nisi. Thanks for sharing your knowledge with us. I love your videos. Thank you very much. I have a question for inexperienced riders on track. Do you have any tips for managing optimal tyre pressure that can help riders with different levels of experience? I haven't seen official statements or recommendations from the tyre manufacturers. One good advice I can trust is from Dave Moss, who says that the tyre in the middle section should be very hot to the point of burning, if touched with the palm of the hand when you come off the track. I understand that we aim at keeping the same temperature as the tyre warmers. Is there a common starting point pressure for slicks and sports tyres? What signs tell us to increase or decrease when it's hot from the tyre warmers, depending on how fast we are? Stan. Well, great question. Sorry, it's a track question for all you road rider lovers. But it's an interesting one, tyre pressures on track. So the general rule of thumb is, you know, tyres are designed to work at a given pressure. So road tyres are generally designed to be used 36 front, 42 rear. And the manufacturers create the whole tyre based on those pressures. And based on those pressures, it works with the construction of the tyre, it works with the shape of the profile, and everything works as it should. As soon as you go on track and ride the bike hard, the pressure goes up because the heat inside the tyres is building. And then all of a sudden you've got a tyre which is kind of more balloon shaped and you've got less contact patch. So you have to decrease the pressures to bring the tyre back to how it should be working. And then racing tyres are designed to work at a certain pressure as well. So let's go through your question point by point. I would say that tyre pressures don't change necessarily depending on whether you're a faster rider or a slower rider. Sometimes slower riders put more load through the tyres. For example, a slower rider will go through corners on track faster than a more experienced rider. So at that point in the track, they're asking more of the tyre at full lean, which is going to stress the tyre out more. but then they're less aggressive on the throttle coming onto the straights because they've spent so long in the corner and they can't get on the throttle. But then an experienced rider will use more of the middle of the tyre, it'll brake harder. So it's kind of swings and roundabouts really, unless you're absolutely dribbling around the track like Maureen from driving school. It's an old reference for you. You're going to be putting heat into your tyres regardless of whether you're in the novice group or the fast group. The good, I've never seen, even when we're testing with tyre manufacturers and when we've been racing, obviously it happens a little bit, but people don't generally go by tyre temperature to judge how their tyre should be. It's more about pressure. So for example, if it's a racing bike and you've got racing tyres, you need to be able to, the manufacturers will give you a hot pressure working pressure from when you come in from the track. So in the morning, before you've actually spun any laps, you would set your tyre pressures at that hot pressure in the tyre warmer. When the tyre warmer's been on for a given amount of time, which the tyre manufacturers advise, it's normally a good hour in the warmers, so you can set the correct pressures before going out on the track, and that's when the tyre works at its optimum. And then during the course of the day, as soon as you come in from the track, then you adjust your pressures again. And that can change during the course of the day where the track temperature goes up and down as the tyre kind of starts to wear in. So generally the pressure will be too high after your first run because you generate more heat on the track than you do in the warmer. So you'll end up putting the pressures down, and then after a while you start to realise how that pressure equates to what it was in the warmer, and it's just always a little balancing act of getting your pressures just right. That's with racing tyres. A lot of road tyres, the manufacturers will give you cold pressures and hot pressures, so they give you a cold pressure to start on, and so basically when you've got a hot pressure, you need to stay in that zone. If your pressure's too high, then the tyre's too balloon shaped when you're around the track, and yeah, it will be hotter. The pressure's too low, you kind of lose your steering, it doesn't feel as nice. Although there's no hard and fast rules, some riders like hard tyres, some like squidgy tyres. But the other thing I would say is not to be too caught up in tyre pressures or tyre temperatures. As long as it's there or thereabouts, it's fine. Quite often we'll do a tyre launch of a road tyre on track and we'll be using road pressures, and it's not really the end of the world. Obviously it's not going to perform as well as it should do, but it's not the end of the world. If I'm doing a track day on my road bike, I'll set the pressures in the morning and I probably won't look at them again for the rest of the day, although I would have with a racing bike, because you're searching for those tenths. But from a safety point of view, as long as you're there or thereabouts, it's going to be absolutely fine. Any other sort of problems you're going to have with your riding is probably going to be something else or something else to do with the bike. So let's go back through it. The different levels of experience doesn't really change how much load goes through the tyres. It could be different. Dave Moss says the tyre in the middle should be as hot when it comes in from the track, which is true. But the other thing to bear in mind is if you're going to use that as a metric, you need to come in from the track and check your tyres straight away and make sure you haven't done a cool down lap, especially the front tyres. The front tyres cool down really quickly. So that's another consideration. You can't do that in a track day. You can't go absolutely banzai to the pit lane on the track day when, after the checkered flag. So again, pressure's a little bit more reliable than kind of touching the tyre. Same temperature as the tyre warmers. Yeah, manufacturers give hot working pressures and hot pressures in warmers, all sorts of different ones. Is there a common starting pressures for slicks and sports tyres? Well, again, manufacturers would give you that, either cold pressures or hot pressures. And then what signs to increase or decrease when hot in the tyre warmers is all down to the pressure when you come in rather than how fast you are. So yeah, a long and complicated answer to an equally complicated question, which I think a lot of people worry too much about, really. Like I say, as long as you're in a safe zone and you're riding properly and you're not trying to set lap records, then I don't think being 1 or 2 psi out on your tyre pressure is really going to change the world. But yeah, interesting question. Let me know how you get on. Next. Cool, this is a longie. I do apologise. Another 2. Do you know why track day groups in this country aren't sorted by lap times? Another track question, sorry. Seems like a sensible thing to do. Then even if you booked late, you'd probably end up in an appropriate group. Well, yeah, abroad, most track days are kind of grouped into lap times. You choose your group at the beginning of the track day, and then after a few sessions, you'll have a transponder on your bike, and then you get sorted into your proper group, which is a lot safer. It still doesn't kind of get around the problem I've spoken a lot about, is the difference in speeds between different size bikes. So you can be doing the same lap time as somebody you're on an R9 carrying massive corner speed and you'll slow down the straight, and if you're on an R1 you'll be carrying massive straight speed and low mid corner speed. So there still is that kind of area where you're going to trip each other up. But generally going in a group where it's sorted by lap times is a good idea. I think the reason they don't do it in the UK is from an insurance point of view. I think, and somebody could correct me, that it's down to a timing thing. As soon as you start timing around a racetrack, it kind of becomes an event, and then it needs different insurances and a different way of running the whole thing. So that's why you don't see transponders here, which is a shame. But again, I think if you had a superbike only group and you took the superbikes out of a lot of the groups, I think the whole thing would be a lot safer as well. But yeah, good question. It'd be nice if we could sort ourselves out into speed, wouldn't it? Finally, from Coach Steve 10, what would your holy trinity of sports bikes be? You know, the GSX-R 750 is one of them, but what would be the other 2 and why? Yes, sports bikes, definitely GSX-R 750 for how much fun it is on the road in kind of small doses, but it's still more practical and easy to ride than a 600. So in terms of that kind of ultimate thrill, 750. Then I would say Toyota V4 1100 factory. Probably one of the nicest sports bikes ever built. You know, you've got that V4 engine, which sounds incredible, amazing performance, not too much power, just incredible ride quality and front end feel. Sounds amazing, and because it's an upright naked, it's easy to live with. You know, you can use it for touring, you can go to the shops on it and everything in between. It's just a sports bike that does absolutely everything, and I think looks great as well. You know, for a naked, I think it looks fantastic. So I'd love one of those. And then finally, 2015 onwards, Yamaha R1, kind of a lightly modified track bike. So something with good suspension, maybe a pipe and some mapping, different brakes, like get rid of the ABS, sort the brakes out. And, you know, I think that would be for me, the ultimate track day bike, really, in terms of the 750 is good fun. That's fun. But in terms of going fast and, you know, absolutely giving yourself that ultimate in adrenaline kick and lap times as well, if you're chasing lap times as well, I think that bike would be amazing. It's an incredible bike. It's very easy to ride. Electronics are fantastic. And I've said before, when those 15 R1s came out and I was racing with Thundersport and MRO, As soon as people got those R1s, they were suddenly at the front of the grid. So they are good. They're really flattering. They're just fantastic bikes, and they sound great as well. They sound like a V4, don't they? So I'd like those three in my garage at some point, without doubt. But that's it for this video. Thanks very much for watching, and I will see you soon.